The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Myriam Hadnes. Myriam, welcome.
Hello, thank you, Michael.
Yes, so Myriam, you are the founder of Workshops Work, where you help individuals and organizations grow their facilitation skills. You have a PhD in behavioral economics. You're the founder of Never Done Before, a community for expert facilitators to help grow their skills, which is often kind of research and development departments and so forth, I believe. But I really want to get into a lot of this and have you share your story of how you've built this business. And I think that our listeners will be excited to learn and will find value in learning about some of your best practices when it comes to facilitation and workshops, because for any consultant, regardless of your industry or where you are in the world, you're probably doing some kind of workshops or some kind of facilitation, even if it's in the form of meetings with buyers and with clients when you get into engagement. So why don't we start off? Before you started doing what you are doing, I know you're originally from Germany, you're now in Amsterdam, but what were you doing before you built this business around workshops and facilitation?
I used to be an academic.
A recovering academic?
Yes, still recovering. Yeah. And so I was teaching economics. Then I built a study program in Vietnam for Vietnamese students, then worked in higher education university strategy. I was the strategic advisor to the university professor in Luxembourg, university president in Luxembourg. And at some point dropped out because I realized that the public sector is just too small, too political. So I needed something else. I moved to Amsterdam to redesign my life. And I tried out different things and came into facilitation basically because I started a meetup through idea parties and couldn't find a job. Because as an academic with my skill set, I didn't fit into any HR box. And it was through the meetups that then people started to ask me to help them to design workshops, to eventually facilitate the workshops, or to pay me for the design without even facilitating them. And so it was really kind of grown from within. And I think what is maybe particular in my vita, my career, my solo career compared to others is that I didn't have my previous employer as my first client.
You did not?
I did not, because I came from academia. I didn't even know what facilitation was when I started my business. And when I look at most of the consultants around me, they quit their job and their first big client is their former employer.
It's very common. Yeah, we did actually a study on this a little while ago at Consulting Success, and it was the majority, I think it was 50 to 60. So I don't remember the exact statistic. We'll try and maybe put it in the show notes afterwards. But yeah, it was quite a few. Like the majority of people, their first client was a previous employer, not necessarily the employer that they just left, but it was one of their previous employers was the most common initial client for most people.
Yeah, which makes the jump very easy and quite safe. And I jumped basically off the cliff without knowing what will be there. And then what paid off was that I've always enjoyed networking, even during my academic career. And so I was lucky enough that my first client basically reached out, I think a few weeks after I actually started officially my business, that they got the budget to have a internal summer school at the European Investment Bank, which is a European institution, and hired me as a consultant for that to help them build that up from scratch.
Okay, so I have a few questions. The first is, you mentioned that you were doing like idea meetups.
Idea parties, I call them.
What is an idea party?
I basically made that up. I think in today's language, I would call it a mastermind. So I invited people to come with a challenge. And then with a group of, I think we were 20 or so, we brainstormed solutions. And I had my very particular kind of design on how to go about this brainstorming. And then the promise was that they would leave with ideas, solutions, and new friends.
And were you charging for this or was it free?
Initial ones were free, and then I charged maybe €5.
Okay.
And I never made a cent out of it. And I eventually actually called it a mastermind and had the brilliant idea of do a pay as you want. And then realized that for a mastermind, you get what you pay for. So if you're charging little, then the quality that is generated is very little. If you charge a lot, then everyone will be happy because it attracts the right people.
It's like most things in pricing, right? Even beyond masterminds, that not only is it true like for you, right? So if you charge a higher fee, let's say a lower fee, you're going to typically get people that are not as high caliber, right? And that's partly because their mindset is they're not seeing the big picture, but it's also a negative for the client, because if they've invested less, they tend to be less invested, right, into achieving an outcome or result, because if they don't take action, they don't have as much to lose. Whereas if they've invested, let's say $10,000 into being part of a mastermind, or in some cases it could be, I mean, there's masterminds that are $100,000 per year. It's like, well, you're going to definitely make sure that you take big action because you want to achieve the result, right? Otherwise it wouldn't make sense. So I think that's a very interesting perspective that you're sharing.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Also, if you invested so much money, then you want to tell yourself that you made the right investment decision. As you say, you will put in more effort in order to make it work, and you will share with more people how successful this was, including yourself, just to keep the self-image right.
Okay. And so that's the idea party. And then where do you get the people? Like, how are you inviting these people? Was this just like on meetup.com, or what were you?
It was mostly on meetup.com. And then I was part of a co-working space. So I told the people in the co-working space and they invited their friends. So it was very grassroots. And
then you mentioned that you had kind of your own like framework or approach to how you wanted to conduct this idea party. Where did that come from? Like, with that knowledge of how to actually structure that kind of an event or a gathering to make it productive?
Yeah. So my background is in behavioral economics. So I have, for my PhD, run experiments to basically measure how humans take decisions and nudge them to take better decisions. So I've observed many people on how we go about communicating with each other, but also, as I was always interested in communication, how we give advice. And for instance, the first activity that I always did was a brainstorm on questions instead of ideas, because we always get defensive if someone throws ideas at us, especially if they don't have enough context about what the problem is about. So if I invite people to come with a challenge and to pitch their challenge in 2 minutes, how good will the ideas be by people, as you said, who paid €5 to join this idea party? But by asking them, okay, what are the questions that come to your mind listening to these challenges? Then you have all the different perspectives. And basically the person who brings in the challenge goes back with an abundance of new perspectives and angles that they can look for a solution within themselves.
Right. So that reminds me of Liz Wiseman in the book, The Multipliers, talks about this concept of the best leaders ask really great questions, right? So as a leader, it's very typically you want to just like, you want to give the direction, say, do this because you know, or you believe that you know, but the best leaders tend to focus on ways to kind of get questions out of their team. So I love that that's what it sounds like you're doing, is you're starting off by, rather than just giving people ideas, you're really focusing on help people to ask the questions that are making them think. And they're probably, because of that, they're able to see bigger opportunities or more expansive opportunities or a more expansive landscape. But I would also imagine they're almost priming themselves subconsciously to be more open to the ideas that are going to flow out from that discussion. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And especially because it empowers them to find their own solutions. Because if they find an answer to the question, and they didn't answer the questions on the spot. So it was basically a gift little gift package for them to go back with these questions. And I think I love what you're saying about the leaders asking questions. And I have the impression that many get the idea of the value of asking questions wrong, which sounds terrible. But I think that if we're asking questions that could have been a Google search, we're wasting everyone's time, because do the Google search. But when we come together in real time, where we are sharing our most important resources, which is attention and time, then let's ask questions where we're actually interested in someone's perspective. And then we want to generate these moments of wonder, of curiosity. And that's what questions are for.
Yeah, I mean, this makes me think like of the connection to what's happening in the world right now with artificial intelligence, right? AI, and everybody talking about AI and ChatGPT and now Google Bard and like all these different kind of technologies and tools. What I'm seeing right now, and I could be completely wrong, but my perspective and observation is that one thing that AI currently is not going to replace is strategic thinking or creative thinking. And so even though you can probably pull out and extract questions from ChatGPT or whatever the AI is, you're probably not going to be able to extract the kind of thoughtful questions that somebody who's really being thoughtful and thinking deeply, thinking strategically, thinking creatively. And so that's the value that, let's say, a facilitator or a workshop or really any consultant brings to their clients, right? So clients that are concerned about AI taking away, or so I should say, consultants that are concerned about AI taking away their job might take off some roles of what you do, but the real value that you can add is not going to be taken away because that comes from the strategic or creative thinking that AI right now in its current form, certainly I don't believe can do. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, this can become a very long tangent and I love it. I agree that AI can help us in strategic thinking. Or cannot help us in strategic thinking. I do believe that the AI-powered assistants are highly creative. When you ask about 20 different ideas, let them do the brainstorm. But then let's do the part where, okay, so what are we doing with these ideas? How can we bring them to the next level? And then it becomes interesting. And what I find sad that some see AI or ChatGPT as a competitor. I think we need to learn to collaborate with them because we learn to better communicate and to be very precise. Because if we are asking a question that's not precise enough to ChatGPT, we don't get anything of value. So we can actually learn to be better communicators through collaborating with AI. Because when I ask a friend or a coworker, a colleague, a question, and I get an answer that is not satisfactory, I get frustrated. You don't understand me. When I don't get the right answer from ChatGPT, I don't get frustrated. I realize, I wasn't precise enough. Imagine how we can grow our own self-awareness, that we're asking the wrong questions because we trained our question asking skills with ChatGPT.
It's a new lens on how to look at it, right? So rather than viewing that it is being negative or positive, whatever, it sounds like you're really taking the approach of where you understand what the limitations are, but at the same time, you're open to the benefits and possibilities of it and really finding ways to harness those inside of your business or, as you said, even inside of communication in a more general way.
And what I also see that if you don't know anything, ChatGPT can be very dangerous to use because it invents information. So you can I asked ChatGPT, write me a workshop plan for a 90 minutes workshop about communication, about asking questions. Fantastic. But then if you add up the times, it doesn't add up to 90 minutes. And if you look closer to it, you're like, maybe you cannot start with this warm up because you first need to create the safe space, for instance. But it's a wonderful start for me then to say, okay, I can work with that. And I know that I have first to create the safe space and that maybe I need to adjust the timings. So I think if you know a lot, then you can really enhance and 10x your productivity with ChatGPT and even creativity because it will give you ideas that you have never considered. If you don't know anything, then it's very dangerous because you will start posting stuff that the real experts identify very quickly as not so true.
Well, so you were definitely right that it's easy for us to go down a bit of a rabbit hole and tangent on AI conversations, but I want to bring it back to focusing on you, Myriam, and how you build this business. So you mentioned that the first client really came from doing these meetups, right? These kind of idea parties. Somebody then recognized like, hey, you seem to have a skill around facilitation workshops. We now have some funding. Can you help us? Fast forward from that point, how did you start getting more business coming in to the point where you felt, hey, I now have a business where I'm helping people with facilitation and workshops?
I think the real accelerator came through the podcast.
And how long ago was that? So give me the year. When did you start the podcast?
April 2019. We are now we're May 2023. And it's precisely 216 weeks ago, I guess.
Right? The episode number, yeah.
Yeah. So it's an episode per week.
How quickly from the time that you started the podcast, and not even how quickly, just at what point, like how far time or number of episodes in were you when you went, this is actually starting to help me with the business?
So I was speaking to Avoid, I think, for 30 weeks, for 30 episodes. And then suddenly I got, I think somewhere between 25 and 30, I got the first call or a message on LinkedIn. Myriam, you've been in my ear all the time. You're exactly whom we need.
And this was an organization?
This was a big organization, and they wanted to have they basically invited all of their salespeople from around the globe to come to the headquarters, and they wanted a conference that is rather a workshop. So all the previous years they had speakers talking to all these salespeople, but now the organization went through a transformation. So they wanted to be more agile, wanted to be more collaborative. So they thought that what they need is actually a workshop approach. And instead of hiring me to design the conference for them, they hired me to enable their team to design the conference.
So 30 weeks. I mean, we're getting, it's almost like a year of speaking to, as you said, the void, or not really seeing any fruits of your labors. To some people, that would seem like insanity. The fact that you keep going when nothing is working, they would look at it and say, I've tried it. Like I've done it for, not only a couple months, it's now been several months, and I'm like not getting results. I'm spending this time, this money, maybe this doesn't work for me in my industry, in my business, in my all this talk in like this mental chatter. You kept going. So why did you keep going?
I think, I don't know how it's for you, but for me, you don't start a podcast because you think that it will be quick conversion, quick cash. There's a deep passion and there's curiosity. And to be honest, when I started the podcast, I thought, so the podcast called Workshops Work, I interview facilitators. I thought initially that after 20 episodes, I'm done. I mean, how many conversations can you have about facilitation and workshops?
Well, it's like, how many conversations can I have with consultants? And, here we are, 300 whatever episodes in. And I feel the same way. So
exactly. So the beauty of it is, and I couldn't see it back then, is I built a network of facilitators expert around the globe. So now I'm working rather as an agency. So if companies come to me and say, okay, we need workshops on the topic of psychological safety, and we have our employees work globally. So we need to deploy these workshops, these trainings in 15 different languages at different time zones. And it needs to be always the same quality, always the same warmth. I can provide that.
You can do that. And so that came as a result of doing the podcast, because you were interviewing the people that would become these, though they were already facilitators.
Associates.
Yeah, associates. Okay. So, and was that the intention? Like, did you kind of see that? So there's no strategy. That was kind of an organic, as you did it, you started to realize, hey, this is an opportunity.
And so the funny thing is, I started the podcast initially because I thought it's a marketing strategy, not necessarily for me, but for the professional facilitators. Because every time I pitched myself as, I'm a facilitator, people would go like, you're a consultant. I'm like, no, I'm a facilitator. I facilitate workshops. And people would go, workshops. Is someone still doing that? So I was there with enthusiasm.
What's the stigma? Why would somebody respond like, workshop?
We're the kumbaya people who sit in a circle, ask you how you're feeling and throw around sticky notes. And then the next day, everyone wakes up like with a hangover. Nobody remembers what has happened and nobody wants to clean up the mess.
I think I must be going to better workshops. When I hear the word workshop, to me, it feels like very productive, an experience, an outcome, a result, like something you kind of like really get your hands in. So it's interesting that stigma exists. I'm certainly not part of that crowd, but
lucky you.
Yeah.
I think there are people that are traumatized from bad workshops. And then, so there's an art in the craft of really designing these experiences. So I thought, okay, let's launch a podcast to show the world what facilitation can do and what it means to be a facilitator. And so I thought that I will then attract these clients so that I can host workshops for them. What I then realized, I think 100 episodes in, was, wait a moment, I am celebrating my podcast guests. These are my heroes. And how can it be true that I am promoting them, giving them a stage, and at the same time kind of competing? And it didn't sit right. And it was about then suddenly I started building a community of facilitator that was never done before. So what is the playground where actually experienced facilitators can test their new ideas? That's why it's the research and development department. And then through this community, which is global, I think we have over 40 countries in the community. Now it becomes the interconnection with the agency and the community with the podcast guests. Suddenly it becomes one big ecosystem.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
I love that. I mean, what's so powerful to me. So as you said, you spent, 30 or so episodes of doing this, right? So multiple months in, and before I was saying, almost a year. So it wasn't a year. It was, a little bit over half a year, right? But still, like it's time putting into this week in, week out. But what you've created today I'm guessing would not have happened if you did not do the podcast, right? And so sometimes you don't know what's going to actually occur unless you try it, right? So just taking the step, taking the action created the opportunity where that opportunity likely wouldn't have come if you wouldn't have actually just started it and continued going.
Totally. And I think the podcast is on the one hand, it's also education for myself. Everything I know about facilitation, I know from my podcast guests. If someone would listen to the 215 episodes, they would know as much as I do. And I think the podcast is, and you might recognize that, you can have a copywriter, you cannot have a copy speaker. So what you speak on the podcast, that's 100% you. You cannot be more authentic. And I do long form. So my interviews are usually 1.5 hours long. Cannot fake it. It's as much as me as they can get. And I think it's a nice way to really build relationships. And I heard someone say that podcasting is caring at scale. I really like that.
Interesting. So let's go back. So the podcast was kind of that initial driver of starting to get more business coming in. Let's now kind of, again, fast forward to today. What's working? How are you generating leads? How are people finding out about the business currently?
I think it's mostly still the podcast. And I have an entire machinery behind the podcast. So I have obviously an editor, but then I have a copywriter who would repurpose the nuggets. For every episode, I write a 1-page summary. So I really do care at scale. I think my weekly newsletter has opening rates of 60%.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah. So people read the newsletter.
And what's inside the newsletter?
It's the 1-page summary. It's usually one part is just a thought of the week that I had, reflecting on something that has usually to do with either leadership, facilitation, or personal development. And then it's a summary of the podcast and the one-page summary.
Love it. All right. So, and these people you mentioned, you have an editor for the podcast, you have a copywriter. Are these people?
Then I write the summary. Yeah.
Yeah. Are they full-time? Are they contractors? What is that?
They're contractors. I work with contractors. I have a team of 6, I think, in total.
You're managing all that? Like you're the central hub for all those 6 contractors?
Yeah. And I think thinking of the moment when I could make the jump to just struggling as a freelancer to really generate some income and to make it fun actually to run a business and then eventually transform into a limited company was hiring a virtual assistant before I was actually able to afford her.
So tell me about that. Like what, number one, I guess 2 questions. What is the first thing that you got her to do? Like why did you actually bring on that virtual assistant? And then I'd love to just kind of put a pin in this, but come back to it. Why did you then make that leap to actually hire a VA before you felt that you could afford it?
It was for all the repetitive tasks. So all the back end, upload the new episode, create a landing page, all these kind of things. And also that was the year in the pandemic, I was hosting my first festival for the Never Done Before community. So there was a lot of back and forth and tech stuff in the background. And I realized that if I spend all the time with the nitty gritty that is actually repetitive or very time consuming, it's not even that I don't have time to generate leads, but I don't have time to generate thoughts that will generate leads.
Yeah. I mean, so one way of looking at that, I don't know who was the person that said this, but it's always resonated with me, is that when you are building a team, whether it's like a VA or, part-time freelancer, full-time, there's 2 parts to it. The first is that you're getting somebody to help you with something. And usually that's going to be something that is maybe lower value work for you, which means you get to focus on higher value work. But the other area that most people don't pay attention to, but in my mind is so critical, is that you're buying back your time. Right. And so like that's the one asset none of us gets to create more or new time. But here, by doing that, you're actually creating and buying time. And so that's a very valuable investment. But let's come to like where you were, because at that moment, you didn't feel like you were in a financial place to be able to afford that, but you still did it. So how did you justify that in your mind and kind of take that leap?
And I think this is the mental piece to it is, yes, you're buying back time, but also I gave myself the clear signal that I will be able to afford it and that's worth my time.
You were operating not based on where you were, it sounds like, in making the decision.
That way I will be.
So you're thinking, well, this is the person I want to become. Therefore, I need to operate and make decisions based on who I want to be, not who I am today.
And I think that's when looking at consultants and those who want to become higher paid consultants, I think that's also how we have to speak with our clients. It's if they would pay just what they can already afford, then they will stay in whatever place they are. But if they want to make the big jump, then also to come back to what you said earlier, it's only when you invest the money that you will then also put the work in to make it happen. So by hiring the VA, getting out of my comfort zone, making a financial stretch, I knew that now I have to make the money and that I have the capabilities to make that money.
The concept, I remember many years ago learning of this idea of like being a mirror, right? So if you want to attract clients that are willing to invest at high levels with you, pay premium fees, then you yourself need to do that. So you can't be the kind of person that goes around trying to skimp, on every little thing and go, oh yeah, I know I need this coaching, I know I need the support, but I'm going to put it off, X number of months until X perfection, stars align. Like you can't operate from that place if you yourself want to then meet clients who you want to when you meet them, they say, yeah, let's move forward. Let's do it. I'm okay to pay these high fees. So you need to act the way that you want others to act. You need to kind of mirror, your behavior in the way that you want others to also, because it tends like that energy attracts, and you tend to connect more with those that you are operating at the same level, right? So if you're surrounding yourself with successful people, like you're going to tend to become more successful yourself just by being part of that community. If you're surrounding yourself with people who aren't thinking about business, not talking about business, and they're always just, negative, or they're not really taking action, or they're holding their potential back, it's unlikely that you're going to be, successful and break through, or it makes it a lot more challenging to do so.
Totally. I think there's so much truth to the saying that you become the average of the 5 people you spend most time with.
Yeah, I think Jim Rohn said that, yeah.
And I think it is because of the mirroring. And I think it's just very inherent human behavior that we do mirror people and adjust to their behavior and thinking for bonding. It's our survival strategy. So we have to become the average of the 5 people. And I think if it doesn't feel scary to start working with a coach, then it's the wrong coach.
I agree. And so I think about this, and my first thought was different people that we've spoken to over the years. And sometimes, we know that they need the help, and they know they need the help. Otherwise, why would they be on a call? Why would they be even exploring it? And then the reason that sometimes people don't move forward is because of the exact same reason they reached out. It's they know they need the help. They know that they've been delaying making a decision, hesitating, and then they do it all over again, right? They just keep hesitating. And so I think about all the years that we've invested into our own coaches and mentors and programs and all that. And in many cases, it's a pretty significant investment that we're making. And you can look at it and go wow, that's a lot of money. Maybe, we should hold off our way to try and do something cheaper. But at the same time, it's well, do you want to stay where you are, or do you want to level up and get to that next place? And the way to do that is by learning from those that have already done that, and where you can get new ideas, new perspectives to help you to see bigger and to then take bigger action, or in many cases, more effective action.
Yeah. And I think it's a mindset you need to nurture and you need to grow in. And I think thinking back of my very early days when I just started my business, I think I had the most impressive looking website and I didn't even know what to sell.
Yeah.
So I spent so much money on designers to create this amazing website. And I think I invested in a coach, and at some point had to break up with him because he was pushing me into developing funnels and all that stuff and pricing and pricing. I don't even know what I'm selling. Then when the first client called, I could send them to a website. They looked at it and it looked as if I was, air quotes, professional enough for them to hire me. And then they believed that they would get the quality. And after they got it, then it becomes a word of mouth business.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you about workshops in a little more detail, because again, consultants in whatever format, they're delivering their expertise, whatever their industry and specialization and so forth. There's an element of workshops that they are probably bringing, even if they don't offer quote unquote workshops as a service or as an offering, they're likely holding a workshop or facilitating some kind of a meeting or an experience with clients. And so I want to cover 2 parts. The first is, what are the most common kind of biggest mistakes that you see people making when it comes to workshops? And I'm sure you've seen them over and over again. So what tends to come up? And then the second is, what's the secret sauce, or what's the best practice to running just a highly successful, impactful workshop?
Biggest mistakes, I think, starts with, trying to be someone that you're not.
What do you mean by that?
That, especially if you're wearing the hat of a consultant and you're there basically to run a workshop because you need some outcome, some input, then it's very easy to think that, I'm the consultant, I know it all, so I have to come across as super professional. And then very often you become stiff. And if you're tense and stiff and try to be someone who you are not, mirroring everyone on the other side of the table or the screen will also be stiff and have the impression that they are not good enough. Although I think the magic of a workshop comes from the fact that everyone feels valuable and the best version of themselves in order to contribute and to grow bigger than its parts.
How do people do that? So let's say, okay, that makes sense. People that are joining us can see that as well. What are the steps that they can take to be more natural, be themselves, and get those that are in the room with them, whether virtual or real life physical, to feel valuable and to feel part of that experience?
So I think the first step is to acknowledge that as soon as you step into a workshop, which is not a training, it's a workshop, you acknowledge that all the wisdom is in the room already.
Does that mean actually you tell the people in the room? Like, do you say that to them?
Yes, because they're there for a very specific reason. So actually, a successful workshop starts even before the workshop starts. So you need to have a purpose. Why are we having this? So you're expecting people to invest their two most important resources, time and attention. Why? Why can't we do this asynchronously? Or why can't it be an email? It's not an email because we need the perspectives and input from everyone who's in there. So why is everyone there? Everyone needs a role. If someone is there just to, let me just be the fly on the wall and I just observe, or, I don't have time and just come in the first 10 minutes and then I disappear, doesn't work, because it will send the signal to the others that it's not important enough. And whoever doesn't have a role, then they very quickly become disruptors. They will be the ones who say, but we've been discussing this for 15 years already. Why do we have to come up with this again? Of course, if they don't know why they're there, they don't know why we're discussing this again. So it's very important to be clear about who is there and why. And very often we step into the trap that we over-invite. If we invite Peter, then we also need to invite Sarah. And if we're inviting Sarah, then how will Michael look at me? And then suddenly you have all these people there and they don't know what they're doing there. And then they won't engage.
So let me ask you a question related to that. Let's say that a consultant is running a workshop or facilitating some kind of a meeting that is really critical to the success of an initiative or a project. And the CEO is going to play a key role. Like, the consultant knows that, but for whatever reason, the CEO has delegated this to others, in management. When that happens, what should the consultant do? If the consultant knows the CEO needs to be part of this conversation, but they've delegated it. Have you ever seen that kind of situation? And if so, what's the best way in your experience to make sure that you do have the right people in the room? And I guess the second part of that question, if I can add, is where maybe the company's saying, let's bring in these other people, but you as the facilitator or the consultant, the advisor, know that those people should not be in the room for whatever reason. How do you handle those two situations?
So with the CEO who doesn't have time, I think it depends who the sponsor is. If the CEO is the sponsor of the workshop and they have an interest in the outcome, they have to be there. Unless sometimes it can actually be valuable not to have the sponsor, the CEO, in the room, because you want to avoid the leadership bias. So, and then it's important to phrase it, and maybe he or she can come in the first 10 minutes to say, okay, this is really important to me, and I will not be here for these reasons. I want you to be creative or whatever. And I come back for the last 10 minutes to listen to what you have created. So at least to give it some framing. And I think there are many reasons why it's very often actually good not to have the CEO in the room. And if they are there, I very often like to give them actually the task of be the air quotes fly on the wall, to observe and ask questions and listen instead of speak too much, and then summarize what they have heard and picked up from the conversation. And this has such a beautiful impact, because then the people feel heard, appreciated, and CEOs usually are fast thinkers, so they can level it up. If they delegate it to people who then delegate it and then invite people who shouldn't be there, I have told clients that this is not possible, that we cannot invite them. What I usually do, especially for these high stakes workshops, is I have conversations with everyone who will be in the space.
Before the workshop.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't need to be long. Can be 15 minutes. What is good is I clarify with them what their role will be. If they don't know and I don't understand, we think together whether it actually makes sense for them to be there. And if they want to be there, then it's on us to figure out what will be the role. How can they contribute actively? Because even if someone is, it's just my assistant, he will just take notes, but otherwise not participate. No, we have AI for that. We'll record. If it's an assistant, what perspective can he bring in that we are otherwise missing? Someone who knows the back end, someone who knows the gossip, super valuable.
So you're really making sure that if whoever is in that room has a very clear kind of role and purpose or some value that they can add. What about the situation where, and I think many consultants have encountered this, where there's somebody that is part of the communication chain or part of, they're in the room and they tend to be toxic or negative, or, they're a detractor. They're not really adding value. How do you handle that? How do you recommend that people kind of navigate that situation?
So there are different parts to that. I think that nobody is intrinsically toxic or wants to be a distractor. It's usually because they don't know why they're there. They don't feel heard, or they felt overstepped or something. So something has triggered them so that they have the urge to over-contribute in whatever shape or form. So this can be, I think the best strategy is to avoid that by having the conversations beforehand. And actually, if I get the sense that there is someone who knows it all, right? There always a knows it all. And then if I know that this person is there, how can I give them a role to actually use it? Oh, Sarah, I know exactly that you have 100 ideas on this topic already because you have thought about that so thoroughly. So I ask you to hold back for a minute and let the others speak first. And then I'm sure that you can add something that we haven't thought about.
Right. So you're thinking about, based on the interaction with them, if it seems like they might dominate or they might add negativity, you're going to try and kind of position them or work with them and almost like guide them so that they're less likely to act in that way, but they're still going to be able to add some value and to contribute.
So I think the challenge is to find the silver lining of these kind of behaviors and see how can they actually contribute another perspective. And I think also what many non-facilitators, an option that is underused, are breakout rooms. So even when we sit all around one table, we never have a conversation with more than 4 people. If there are more than 4 people around the table, it's either one person speaking and everyone listening, or it's a conversation between 2 or 3. And then what happens are usually side conversations. And then people start whispering or exchanging glances. Online, it's the same, with the only exception that we cannot have side conversations. So how can we help everyone to contribute if there's no space for all these people? Break them up. Say, okay, take 4 minutes, 5 minutes, discuss in a one-on-one or in a group of 3, and then come back and share. And people feel safer in a smaller group.
I love these tips around, a process is very thoughtful. I love the idea of having these conversations, these calls in advance to really set the stage to make the workshop or meeting itself significantly more effective, likely also more kind of efficient and productive. I want to get your thoughts on pricing for a moment. People often wonder, what does the market bear when it comes to workshops? And so, again, I have 2 parts to this, I guess, this question that's coming to my mind right now. And the first is, if we just look at workshops by itself, what's the range that you've seen, and I know there's a lot of kind of variables and factors, and I welcome you to share maybe what some of those more common variables and factors are. But yeah, what is the range? Like, what's the high end of a workshop that you've seen? And then what's the lower kind of entry, starting point for a workshop from a pricing perspective?
It depends on so many factors. So if you have a room full of, if you have a C-suite in a workshop, strategy, offsite, then obviously you have to price it in the 10,000s. Also, to coming back to what you said, how much time would they use preparing this workshop? If it's peanuts, then it won't be worth their time.
So is that like one day, 10, 20, 30,000, something like that? Or
yeah, maybe a day, 10,000. Yeah.
Okay. And if someone is focused on delivering workshops, if that's like, let's say, a core offer for them, what have you seen people do, or what do you suggest that people do if, let's say, they want to earn more than $10,000 per engagement? I
must be clear. So the 10,000 per engagement, that's the upper range, I would say, and for strategy workshops. And then it depends on, I think, focus on the value. Instead of, nobody buys a workshop. There's no client who comes to you and says, I want a workshop. No, they They want you to solve a problem, and they want you to solve the problem with their resources. Otherwise, they would hire a consultant. Right? So a facilitator doesn't come with a solution. They come with a process and with the questions that help their people solve the problem. So I think then starting with what is the cost of not having the workshop. So if, for instance, they need a strategy workshop because they need to increase sales. What if they don't solve this problem and bankruptcy? Or they have a talent problem and they need to attract more talent. So what is the real value to solve this problem? And how much of this could they,
That's exactly the guidance that we work with clients through in terms of pricing. It's nobody wakes up saying, like I want to buy a strategic planning session or this deliverable, or, it's the outcome, it's the result, it's the value to be created. And then just to make the distinction for those that may not be clear yet, how do you view the difference between a workshop and a training?
Mm-hmm. For a training, you can facilitate a training. But I think in general, a trainer comes in to bridge a knowledge gap. So the group needs knowledge that they don't have yet. So they're hiring a trainer who hopefully uses facilitation in their method to help them learn these skills. A facilitator comes in with the belief that all the knowledge is in the room already. So the number of people who are sitting there have everything they need, but they're lacking the vehicle to actually really bring that out and put the pieces of the puzzle together.
I love that. It's a very clear way to kind of see the difference between those two things. So Myriam, there's so much more that we could keep talking about and going over here. I want to respect the time that we have in the calendar, but I want to also make sure that people can learn more about you, about your work, about your podcast, about your community for facilitators, and just everything else that you have going on. So where should people go? Where's the best place, the one maybe website that they should go to or destination to find out more about you and everything else that you have going on?
I think the easiest way is LinkedIn. I'm an open book on LinkedIn, and from there they'll find me and find their way on my newsletter. Okay,
there we go. They get 60+% open rates, which is, unheard of is not an accurate term, but it's so far above the standard that I think that definitely people need to check that out. I'm interested in checking it out because I want to see, what's the goodness that you got in there it's the magic, right? So Myriam, we will link that up. We'll have your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, and people can obviously find you as well just by going to LinkedIn. I want to thank you so much for coming on here today, sharing just, a bit of your journey. I know there's so much more that we could dig into, but I appreciate what you've shared so far, and just really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for the invite, Michael. Pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.